The restoration industry is under siege. Sales are soft, margins are razor thin, getting paid feels like pulling teeth. This is a wartime environment, and restoration leaders need battle-tested tactics that work when everything's on the line. You're listening to Mission Critical, the podcast where the industry's elite operators share the systems, strategies, and scars from the trenches. I'm Leighton Healey, the CEO of Know How, and we spotlight restorers who refuse to go quietly into the night. My guest today, Kristin Smith, a world-class financial operator who got her start navigating the volatility of the oil and gas industry before stepping into the fire as CFO and now president of Mooring USA, one of the most respected restoration companies in North America. While most leaders in this industry grew up on the job, Kristin brings something different to the fight, the cold, hard discipline of financial warfare. She's the operator who builds revenue diversification strategies that actually work when restoration seasons go quiet. She's the one who can tell you exactly what it costs to bring a subcontracted service in-house and whether it's worth the investment. In just 2 years, she's helped Mooring USA attract a well-aligned private equity partner while protecting their rich family culture. She's cross-trained teams between service lines to maximize utilization during slow periods, and she's the leader checking the weather, cash flow, and daily job setups before her feet even hit the ground in the morning. This conversation dives into the specific business levers Kristin pulled, the metrics she tracked, and the systems she has built to navigate an industry where Mother Nature controls the revenue forecast. If you're looking for concrete tactics to stabilize cash flow, diversify revenue streams, and lead through financial uncertainty, this operator has been through the storm and come out sharper. Let's get into our conversation with Kristin. Well, welcome everyone to this episode of the Know How podcast. And I'm really excited for this discussion because we have a really exciting guest, Kristin Smith, the new president at Mooring USA, one of the most respected companies in the industry. And Kristin, laying a strong foundation, leading the finance arm of that organization as CFO, and now moving into the president role to lead the next push of Mooring USA. Excited to have you on the show. And for those that haven't had an opportunity to meet you and meet your organization, take a moment and give us some of your story, and then tell us a little bit about Mooring USA.
Absolutely. I have been in the industry for only 2 years, and so it feels like I've been drinking water out of a fire hose, but it's been so much fun to learn the ins and outs of restoration. Previously spent some time public accounting and then oil field services. And so this is a very different industry and experience for me. I tell everyone all the time that I left oil and gas partially because of the volatility in the industry. And the one thing I underestimated was Mother Nature and the volatility of storm season and disaster restoration industry. So it's a whole different volatility game, but it's been really fun to take that challenge on and figure out some good solutions for the business to overcome that and to stabilize that period of time. And Mooring is their family has been in the industry for over 75 years, 3 generations. John Scott Mooring, our CEO, and Ben Mooring, our founder and chairman, they grew up doing restoration. And so we just really have years and years of experience and operational excellence and customer relationships that drive Mooring USA. But among all that, I think my very favorite thing about the business is the culture. The Moorings are incredibly generous and caring and just really focused on the people that make Mooring what it is today. And just recently brought in a private equity partner in Crossplane Capital. And so we have sophisticated the business and are just looking forward to taking it to that next level alongside Crossplane. Exciting times for the growth of Mooring.
Amazing. And I just think that it's so interesting that at a time when the industry seems to be going through a real period of, call it, financial turmoil in some regards, I just think it's so exciting that the company, they've brought a someone with deep financial chops into that president function. So I'd love to just get right into it because
Yeah.
you bring what I think is such an important perspective. You've come from an industry in oil and gas with an accounting background, accounting designation, as I understand it, an industry that I mean, I'm headquartered in Alberta, Canada,
Mhm.
which is an oil hub as well, and so I'm quite
Right.
familiar with the oil and gas industry. And one of the dynamics of the oil and gas industry is that you have a lot of participants where we push a lot of the same product. We use a lot of the same inputs in our business, and so it's really around operational excellence, speed of
Hmm.
innovation, but also relationships, right? Relationships.
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
you're relatively new to the industry. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what do you see as some of the real, like, let's call it impressive qualities of the industry? And what do you see as just what are some characteristics of the industry that kind of surprised you and you see them as opportunities?
So I'm going to start with the opportunities. I think that there is so much data in oil and gas, and you have these products and these research tools that are out there that can tell you what every well in the world is doing at any given time, and you can use it's almost an overabundance of data. And you can use that for analytics and decision making. And coming into restoration, it's minimal public companies, minimal research tools, minimal data. And so I had this need to look at 10Ks and this need to look at industry metrics, and was having to try and find that information through conversations with investment bankers and financial institutions and my peers in our competitive businesses, and it was just like pulling teeth. And so I think there's so much change and consolidation going on in the industry right now that I look forward to bringing a level of collaboration amongst the businesses where we can work together to solve some of the challenges that we're all experiencing and publicize more data as we mature as an industry.
So what has been your experience, Kristen? Because many people like you referred to the founders of Mooring, the Mooring family legacy, like definitely like, I'm in the time that I've spent in the industry, definitely recognized very quickly that the Mooring family, very respected, very admired, very influential. But with you coming into the industry, bringing fresh perspective, super relevant skill set, like coming in as a very finance driven leader, I find that many of the leaders, they tend to be a little bit siloed in how they think about sharing what's working, what their concerns are, what's keeping them up at night. They tend to safeguard some of their secret sauce and whatnot. And so when you think about like a collaborative industry that you came from, what does, maybe for those that are kind of a little sheepish to really be collaborative to the extent that you've
Mhm,
experienced, what
mhm.
does a collaborative industry look like? What, like, if I was to just be more open with other of my peers in this industry as a senior leader, like what would I have that I don't have right now?
I think the reason the industry's fairly new, and I think 75 years old ish. And
Ish,
and and
yeah.
so I think a lot of the people in the industry have at one point worked together or one point worked for another business. And you have all of these process and procedures that have been established at one business and carried on to another. It's just there's similarities across the board. And I so often hear, this is just how we've always done it. This is just here how we've always done it. And so people, I think, have this feeling of innovation and proprietary processes when they think about changing the way it's always been done. And so they're scared to share that. Maybe that's improved their business and it's something they want to keep to themselves. But the reality is that a lot of the changes are obvious and
Mm.
necessary, and it's not rocket science. A lot of it's technology, leveraging technology. And so I think just lifting up the entire customer experience, the efficiencies within the organizations across the board are just going to allow us to be a more profitable industry that is going to take the industry to the next level.
And what's been your experience? So recently you brought in a capital partner. I find that when people are very protectionist, oftentimes it's they have identified things that they believe are so valuable that they could never disclose them. When you go through, you talked about before we got on here, you had to run a process, and it was a very fruitful experience. You said in terms from a learning perspective, I mean, through that you would have learned what this new partner of yours values, like what to them is like, what really are the metrics, the KPIs, like the indicators, those. What are you willing to share anything just coming out of that you would say was just very clarifying for you or very interesting in terms of just better understanding what a partner like that values in an industry like this?
Absolutely. I think I would group it into three categories. We have different segments. We have three different segments, primary segments within mooring. We've got mitigation specialty services. We've got restoration, which is rebuild, reconstruction. And then we have remodel, which is not insurance related. It's more tenant improvement. And we've built the specialty services, reoccurring pipeline, clean revenue, if you will, segment, and the remodel segment to stabilize the cash flow. So to remove some of the volatility from emergency response, disaster restoration. And so what was really important for our partners was, okay, we've got these two businesses that aren't necessarily core to emergency response, but that provide this great benefit to the business and also provide an opportunity to cross-sell to a whole different group of customers. And so for them, it was the effectiveness of cross-selling between the segments and the effectiveness of utilizing our employees between the segments. If we're in a slow season for disaster restoration, then maybe we're using those personnel on the remodel TI side of things. And so just really finding those cross-selling opportunities. The second one that they were really focused on is MSA conversions. So everyone can talk about the list of MSAs that they have with really exciting prospective clients, but MSA is just a piece of paper that oftentimes goes in a drawer. And so what techniques is mooring using to convert those MSA clients into actual revenue? And what are the strategies? What does that look like? And what is the conversion rate? What's the timeline from getting a signed piece of paper to actually making them a producing customer? And then culture. Every bit of it was culture and the fact that we valued integrity, family, excellence, boldness, humility, and in everything that we did, including choosing a partner, that was our number one priority. And I think you see most of our executive team members have been with the business the moorings for 17 plus years. And
Wow.
and so I'm anomaly at two. And I think that speaks to the culture that we've established. And it's really important that we do everything we can to maintain that going forward, even as we grow with a financial partner.
Hmm. Let me capture some of that and just follow up with a couple questions. I think that's very interesting. So what I am understanding is there's three things going on there. So one is, and I'm going to do them a little out of order here. What you have is the MSA conversion is a really interesting ratio that I don't hear a lot of people talk about. So my understanding is that we go in and we engage with these organizations, probably like direct type work, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some type of a master service agreement that's put in place in the event of some event or somewhat. And so for many, it's almost
right.
like cold comfort. It's like cold comfort. It's like sometimes you call it it's like a blanket that doesn't hold warmth. It's like, oh yeah, we got all these MSAs. And I think what you're saying is, well, like how much juice are you actually getting out of those? Like let's actually quantify the tangible value, and then let's ask ourselves, what are some tactics that we can do to actually generate revenue rather than just kind of waiting around and hoping that something happens and that they recall that they have an MSA in place with us? What are some things that we can do to actually, in a sense, create some value out of what can often be a false sense of comfort? Is that fair?
That's fair. It's a license to hunt,
Yeah.
and oftentimes they have it with multiple providers, especially when
Yeah.
you're in storm areas. And so
Mm.
it goes back to the customer relationship. We don't want to just sign a piece of paper and wait for something to happen. How can
Mm.
we help you out in the meantime? How can we make your life easier? What are your challenges you're experiencing? What are your day-to-day CapEx maintenance type revenue where we can stay in front of you, we can help you, we can provide for
Mm.
you, and prove that when you do have a large loss or an emergency situation, that we're the right partner for you to choose amongst the 3 to 4+ MSAs that you have in your drawer.
And do you have anything
And we
you
watch
become?
that. We watch those
Yeah.
metrics closely. From
Yeah.
signing to conversion to jobs. It's an interesting metric
Mm.
for the team.
And with your emphasis on relationships, I mean, relationships is you shared is a big part of not only your values but your success story. One of the things that sometimes I'll hear is, for me to move into really developing these more robust, potentially more fruitful large organizations or these large accounts, I have to be able to kind of invest in relationships. And sometimes that can be kind of nebulous and hard to quantify because the inputs don't always bear outputs, in a predictable timeline. I'm curious from your perspective, coming from the CFO seat, how did you what did the sales leadership give you that gave you comfort that those relationship building activities were going to bear fruit?
That is a work in process. I
Yeah.
one of my first questions to our head of sales was, okay, where's our return on investment? How much have we spent on customer A this year versus how much have they
Mm.
produced in terms of revenue? And it was a bit unorganized initially. So we've really been working on our CRM, and good information in equals good information out. I don't care what CRM you use. It's making sure that we have everything from customer name to decision and authority chart in there, to when we talk to them, what we talk to them about, what are their needs, what are their losses per year, are they a centralized or decentralized decision making leadership team, and just really digging in, making sure we have all of the detail that's in there. And then we actually are working on a system where it connects our sales and marketing budget and spend with those customers, and then also with our accounting ERP, so that we can see, okay, we spent X amount on customer A and we did revenue of X amount with customer A. And so I would say we've progressed a lot in the last 2 years, but return on investment is really important for me. And if we've spent
Mm.
$100,000 on a customer over 2 years and haven't gotten any work from them, then maybe what we're doing isn't productive. And so how do we really
Mm.
dig in and get to the bottom of that? I think when we talk about relationships with customers, it's so much more than hosting events. It's really forming a personal relationship, deciding who's the best in the organization. It might not be the person with the lead, but deciding who's the best organization to really get in, relate to the decision maker, and then honing in on what are their biggest pain points and making sure that we can solve them, even if it's an out of the box service to begin with.
Yeah, I think that's very tangible perspective on something that can be very intangible. Because what I'm hearing you say
Mm,
is, no question, like, let's just call it what it is. Let's call a spade a spade. Yes, relationship building activities, can run the risk of being very nebulous, and you just get these expense requests from BD leaders, and you're like, you know, this is a big stake receipt, you know, and you have these kind of, these kind of qualitative comments like, oh, they're really motivated, or and so what I'm hearing you say, you know, I'm working through my own trauma with my own sales teams, right? But what I'm hearing you say is, first and foremost, you said this a couple times, the data matters. The data matters, and so let's invest in these systems for us to be able to write down to an account, to be able to really understand what in a sense our investment has been and what the fruit and the return has
mhm,
been, and let's really keep an
mhm,
eye on that. And so I think that's really interesting. And then, it's interesting how, an organization like yours balances, you know, a value of data and a value of relationship, and that they're, in a sense, this kind of, paired dance couple. So maybe let's come back to that. The other thing that you talked about is the way that you're creating diversification of your revenue to be able
Mhm.
to, in a sense, let's call it, remove some of the choppiness of the revenue. I'll
Exactly.
just share two. I'll just share two quick perspectives, and I'd love to just hear how you think about this. So on one side, we do this annual report with the Restoration Industry Association called the
Mhm.
Cost of Doing Business in Restoration. And one of the things that I have just
Mhm.
really found very interesting has been just this pendulum between, should we gain from the efficiencies of specialization, or should we hedge our bet and go multi-service as a way of, yeah, just benefiting from the diversity of revenue streams and not putting all our bet on one horse, so to speak. And then at the same time, I just think about, the perspective that you bring to the table, in that you brought in a capital partner. And when I talk to capital organizations that are really interested in this industry, I always kind of make some of the same cheeky joke, which is, I bet your analysts had a lot of fun trying to forecast revenue in this industry, right? What's your take on all that? I mean, the people that are listening that have maybe considered some of these factors, they're tracking with us here. What's your take on all that? There's diversifying revenue versus, just lean into the efficiencies of just mold only, and at the same time, this is an industry for people who crave some level of clarity in the future. So many aspects of this industry seem to make it difficult to forecast accurately. How do you deal with all these dynamics?
If I had a perfect answer for you, I wouldn't be sitting here today. But I
Yeah.
over the last 2 years, what I'll tell you is it's really easy when I'm doing my 13 week, when I'm doing my budget, when I'm
Yeah.
doing my monthly updated 5 plus 7 or whatever it might be, to talk to remodel and get the pipeline work that we have and estimate that out fairly accurately, and to do the same with the reconstruction side of the business. And then mitigation, I can tell you for the next 4 to 6 weeks, the cash flows that are coming in. And outside of that, it ties back to my model. And my model
Yeah.
is going to be wrong 100% of the time.
Mhm.
What I find comfort in is if I had those other two segments of the business relatively honed in on, then I know, okay, I can cover my fixed costs with these two segments. And I can then work to get a relatively accurate mitigation, really starting from the customer up. So I do two approaches. I do a top down. What are my ownerships and boards revenue? What do they think it should be? And what is my growth year over year? And then I start with the customers and I say, okay, this customer has done 20 million over the last 2 years, and I can expect that this year. This customer's done 10 million. I can expect that. And I build it up for our reoccurring customers and then have a go get it category. And so I think it reduces the fluctuations. But again, the one segment that every weekly cash call I'm on throws us off a bit is mitigation. And so it's getting as accurate as you can, finding those customers that have recurring losses on a national basis that you can relatively depend on. And then it's finding a cadence of new work coming in from prospects. We do look at MSAs, but we don't place a whole lot of weight on those as we do our forecast. It's more trending back to what we've done historically, and then the prospect list layered on top.
And what would be, one of the things you mentioned earlier is, you said, you just have a very collaborative characteristic about just kind of how you think about engaging with other people in the industry. So, I think about just industry events and getting together around a round table. For those, business leaders in this industry who are really just sitting on the fence of whether or not they should add a diversified revenue line. So, you talked about, we have this kind of traditional kind of mediation type remediation line, and then you've got kind of that recon line. They also have that really interesting, tenant improvement driven line. And then I've learned a little bit about some of the specialty services that you're thinking about. And so there's a lot of layers to that cake. So for someone who just, is at that place where they have to kind of decide if they're going to add another service line, what would be your advice to them? Like, what are the things that they should factor in? What are some cost areas that they may not be considering?
There's so many complementary adjacent services to this industry. And so the first
Mm.
thing I do is I look at our vendor lists and I look at our sub lists and I say, okay, how much are we utilizing sub for certain services? And asbestos, for example, is if I bring that in house, can I improve my margins by 10%, by 15%, by more? And how much total revenue did I sub out related to that during the year? And
Mm.
what kind of uplift can I do to my financials by bringing that in house? And I do that for all of the major areas that we use first responders or subcontractors for. And I start with that list to say, okay, bringing this in house, how does this enhance the customer experience with mooring? It allows us to be a little bit more turnkey. And then what is the margin improvement on that? I compare that against the cost to invest in that type of business, either organically through a kind of a greenfield or by acquiring a business. And it's a pretty easy kind of analysis to say we do enough asbestos services to hire someone with that expertise, bring him in house, and have an immediate uplift to the margins. And that's the approach that we've taken alongside Crossplane to really say, how do we grow pipeline business? And it's more predictable, easier to forecast, and is really already something that we often do or sub out and adjacent to the mitigation work we're selling.
So very interesting. So I don't hear that perspective often. I think it merits just double clicking on it. So what you're saying is, I believe what you're saying is, okay, so we have these secondary service lines, or we have these tertiary lines, or these services we provide, and naturally, we don't have that, let's call it labor capacity in house, so we bring in a subcontracted partner, and then, but what I think what you just said, and I could just tell you that I can see how a person would easily overlook this is, well, let's do a bit of an analysis and get a sense of if we act like how much of that service did we do, how much of it did we sub out, and if we just run the
Mhm.
numbers on it and we just consider, based on the cost of building that capacity internally and actually resourcing it through BD and
Mhm.
whatnot, or promoting it as a cross service as we move into other industries, like really,
Exactly.
like, are we ahead? I don't know if I've
That's right.
heard somebody look at it that way. I think that's very wise. It's very strategic. We all see how much money we're shipping out the door, in our AP to our subcontractors. But I don't know if we actually ask ourselves, hey, let's actually do a little bit of a workup to see, you know,
Mhm.
just based on the costs, what would it look like to bring this capacity in house? Do you have an example of a service where you've done that workup and you've decided to bring the service in house?
We are, there's 3 or 4 services we're looking at right now.
Okay,
And
and
so
you
I
don't
don't
have to
wanna
tell. You don't have
disclose
to
quite yet,
say.
but
Okay.
yeah, no,
Yeah. Don't.
it's
Your
I
subcontractors
think
aren't
in the
listening to this
industry.
podcast.
Right. I think in the industry, it would be just I think it would be pretty obvious.
Hmm.
Janitorial is one that we're not, but it's one that comes to mind, right? It's an
Sure.
adjacent service, and oftentimes our competition when we're bidding a mitigation projects is with someone who provides a janitorial service. So it's something we have not yet
Mm.
analyzed, but it's one that I think is worth looking into. But you have other things. I think asbestos, mold, roofing. There's all kinds of different. Some people carpet cleaning. There's I think a whole different array of things where a lot of us do it in-house and a lot of our peers outsource it. And so it's really just taking a look at all of those services and deciding if margin improvement by bringing in-house is something that enhances the business, the value of the business.
And how do you think about? I mean, with four service lines, three core, and then it sounds like you guys are cooking on some other ones. Like, how do you factor in when you think about just the like? Because I think one of the things that I can say for myself, I don't really I haven't given too much thought to until just this conversation is there must be a compounded benefit. Like it's for every line that you introduce, if they're complementary the way you've described it, like they must, in a sense, there must be a compounding benefit that they bring to each other as you think about, because it's not just add a layer, no real amplification from each other. Like there must be an amplification factor as they cross sell into each other, as they tie into each other. How do you think about that?
Mhm.
Like how these revenue lines Do they have kind of a compounding benefit on each other? Do you see that?
We look at it a lot on the input side, on the cost side. And so
Oh yeah.
if my labor is utilized 70% of the time right now, but I can establish other services where when we're slow on the emergency response, I can transfer them over and fully utilize them for a recurring CapEx job or a tenant improvement or a specialty service such as HVAC duct cleaning, then I'm maximizing the utilization of my labor. I'm protecting my people. I'm getting more out of them. And so we really that benefit to it. But one of the most common things we hear from our customers is that we're their only turnkey provider. And so
Mm.
we can do the TI, we can do the resto, we can do the mitigation, and we want to continue to add services to that list because we're a one-stop shop. And that's I think a
So-
little bit of a differentiator for mooring.
And I think that, and beyond that, I would think that one of the obstacles that a lot of restorers that I interact with have to build out a true like direct repair, like just direct to consumer, is they're just not front of mind for these consumers, right? They're just not front of mind because
Mhm.
the only time I really ever hear about you is a terrible, stressful time where like I'm really not accessing my prefrontal cortex. I'm not thinking clearly. I'm
Yeah,
not reaching for the
right.
magnet on my fridge.
That's right. Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
I'm in a bad situation and I'm listening to this adjuster, this insurance agent on the phone saying, I'm going to connect you with one of our preferred vendors. And you're like, okay, so as opposed to, whoa, actually, I have someone I work with.
Mhm.
They just wrapped up a project on one of my properties. And so, I think I'm going to give them a call. Trust is
The
there,
hardest thing is
relationships there.
getting the first loss. The
Getting the
hardest
first
thing
loss.
is getting the first loss. Once we get the first loss, we have such operational excellence and response that we always get a second loss. And so if
Mm.
I can stay in front of them, if I can stay relevant to them, if I can prove myself in other ways so that I am top of mind when that large loss comes in, then it's almost like a foot in the door.
Mm.
But hardest part's getting that first loss for that exact reason. Now the other side of that is adjuster, consultant, and broker relationships are really important in this industry. Establishing a connection with them at the very beginning of a loss, making sure they have all the information, that we're aligned on scope all the way through to negotiating at the end of it. It's just as important for us to make their life easy and our work transparent with them as it is to the customer. And a focus of ours is also maintaining and building those relationships and working alongside them.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. Yeah, I love the interplay that you've built in your business. And one thing that if we have time, you mentioned something earlier around how it sounds like you've cross-trained your team between service lines. Did I understand that correctly? Yeah, is
Yes.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, that's really interesting.
It's
Yeah,
It's
it's really interesting.
interesting when we always go to the CAT PMs first, right? But we have
Mm,
had examples in our past of large storm events and large projects where we've had to pull restoration and remodel PMs into the mitigation side of things. And
mm,
they do things a little bit differently, but it's part of learning the business. It's part of, like I said earlier, employee utilization. They're always willing to, and every single year before hurricane season, we do a refresher for those employees, specifically with the hopes that we're able to pull some of them and utilize. We don't ever want to turn away work. And so to the extent that we can keep our current remodel projects going, that we have extra resources to pull into the mitigation side of the business, that's ideal.
You know, one of the, you were talking earlier around just utilization levels of labor and whatnot, and what I know of your organization, both from what you described and just interacting with members of your team, I know that like
Mhm.
culture is paramount. You care about people,
Mhm.
and so I just say that as a bit of a caveat to talking about people and using the term resource. You know what I mean? So because
Mhm.
to me, I know that culture is really important. It's just that it's like that you said it. You said, hey, when we chose a capital partner, we wanted to find someone that was a good dance partner for our cultural values. And anyways,
Absolutely.
just to stay that because I want to get a little bit granular and use some terms that people might give us a hard time for saying people are not resources. Like, well, I mean, we have to call them something on a spreadsheet. We have to, yeah. So, but when you talk about
The way
utilization
that
and
I look at it,
yeah.
go ahead.
Go. No, I was just gonna say I was gonna say you're talking about utilization and uptime of labor, but I would assume you think about the same
Mhm.
thing about equipment. Like there must be a benefit that you experience from idle equipment, and idle
Mhm.
resources broadly across all of those services. It'd be interesting to see what how what you do when ultimately people start competing for resources internally, like if there is like true favorite child service that is, I don't know, maybe it's margin driven or something like that. But tell me what you wanted to say, because I'm interested in you're starting you were about to say something, and then I was blabbing on about equipment utilization.
Right. I will talk about equipment just for a moment. We own all of our own mitigation equipment. We have a lot of it.
Okay.
And the battle becomes when we run out of all of our own equipment and we start having to rent. There's this whole analysis that goes on. Okay, the first job that comes in gets the equipment that's needed. Our MSA customers are prioritized. We have equipment strategically placed all over the United States. And so if I have a loss right next to an equipment trailer, that loss is going to get that equipment trailer from a cost perspective, it makes sense. And
Yeah.
so there's a whole analysis that goes on, but we do oftentimes have heated conversations between business developers and operations to determine what goes where, when, and how. But it's always it's a good problem to have, right?
And I think that
But then
I,
what I was going to go
yeah.
go ahead and finish with that.
I was just going to say, I was having a conversation yesterday with a restoration firm that's smaller in size from you, and
Mm,
and they're having the exact same challenge that you're describing. And I always think it's
mm,
amazing and encouraging to for restorers of any size or businesses of any size to realize that the problems stay the same in many ways, but the numbers and the stakes just rise. But the problems are very similar, right?
mhm.
That's why I love your collaborative spirit, Kristen, because it doesn't matter. You don't have to be cranking out the same revenue numbers to be able to cross pollinate and share value, because we share so many of the same challenges. But go on.
Absolutely.
What were you saying?
Going back to the employees and resources, I think when I say resources, I think of every single part of our organization. What does Mooring have to offer? How can we be a resource to our customers, a productive turnkey resource to our customers? And that includes really every aspect of Mooring, including myself. And so I think I always tell everybody in my CFO position, people were my favorite thing to do and number second. I think it is so important to have a clear, concise, transparent, communicative culture. And that allows ultimately during these emergency response events, when you're getting calls that are coming in and competing interests, it really allows everyone to take a step back and say, okay, I know this person, I respect this person, we work well together. I see them for who they are. And ultimately come to a resolution that's at the best benefit for Mooring and for our end users, our customers. And hopefully nobody takes that term offensively. I
I
just
don't
think collective is a resource, and that includes all
totally.
the people within it. Yeah.
Oh,
Yep.
totally. Yeah. Well said. Yeah, well said. Let's shine a spotlight on your culture for a moment, because I've heard very positive things. I haven't
Mhm.
yet, experienced it, but I will, right? That opportunity will present itself. What do you think are just I mean, you've been at the organization now for, you spent 2 years in the CFO role, you're moving into the president role. So you're well acquainted with the culture. You've been around the boardroom table with the leaders, with your fellow leaders, where they're proverbially banging their fist on the table, saying, "This is what we value. This is what our culture is." How would you describe the Mooring culture? And would you be willing to share any rituals or routines that you think really highlight the Mooring culture?
It all begins with both John Scott and Ben Mooring. Ben,
Mm.
it was the founder, still involved daily in the business. He has personal relationships with many of our customers, personal relationships with our operations team, and he is the biggest cheerleader. He's constantly asking about customers. He's constantly looking at the job setup forms. He's consistently excited about events and storms, and it just energy around, and the passion, the genuine passion he has. This is his baby for this business, I think gets everybody passionate and excited and loyal. And it really truly is a tone at the top that he sets from a passion perspective. Now, John Scott came in a couple of years after, then established the business and has completely taken the reins as CEO of the organization since I think 2007. And he is, if I could use one word to describe him, it's generous. He's truly a generous leader. He sets aside during his ownership time, set aside 10% of the net profits of the business, specifically in an employee assistance fund that was dedicated to the needs of employees and community efforts. And even in my 2 years here, I can't tell you how many times we had a need that came up, we were able to respond to. Sometimes it was tangible and financial, and sometimes it was intangible. But he just ensured that we had the support above and beyond coming out of his pocket and going into a fund to really take care of the employees. And it's truly putting your money where your mouth is. And a lot of people benefited from that in a time of need. And it goes back to the whole purpose and mission of the company. And so I love the fact that we're doing to our people the same thing we're doing for our customers. And I think that passion and that generosity has permeated. It's why we have loyalty within our employee group. And it's why people care to continue to uphold the reputation of Mooring.
So you get FaceTime with Ben and John Scott. But if I'm just like, someone just rocking the Mooring USA t-shirt, what are some of the ways that Mooring communicates and reinforces what you're describing? Because it sounds awesome. And I'm just wondering, I just find that companies struggle to find effective ways to routinely communicate and reinforce what they value. And I'm just wondering how you see that play out in your organization.
We have the Mooring mission statement and core values on the wall, and we begin every quarterly town hall with those in mind. We use it to evaluate every single candidate that comes to an interview with Mooring, and we use it to evaluate on a quarterly basis and an annual basis. And so it's really an ingrained part of our processes and procedures. If we have a PIP, there's a reason there's a PIP, and it all ties back to one of our 5 core values. And so I think it's just become part of the business. And to the extent that you're not upholding those core values, it's directly reflected in your feedback. And to the extent you are, it's directly reflected in the employee of the month or a call out during the town halls. And so I think you just have to live and breathe it. And we do. It's not just something on the wall. It's something we talk about every single day and every single time we evaluate an employee. And then my favorite thing about Ben is Ben is so big on the ops side. If you can't find him in his office, he's in the warehouse. He's talking to the guys. He wants to see the pieces of equipment that we've got. He wants to hear about a job. And it's not just to be present. It's because he's genuinely invested in the success of the business, and he finds passion and satisfaction in hearing about the latest trends or investments we've made.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. We don't have time to delve into it, obviously, but just the fact that both him and John Scott continue to have that level of influence in the organization with a capital partner involved, to me tells you that you clearly vetted and selected the right capital partner. I've heard stories of individuals who brought in that capital partner and there wasn't an alignment, and the culture began to change, and the influence of the founders began to wane, and this isn't the place that I signed up for. You start to hear in the halls, and so. Anyways, I just really applaud the level of intentionality and forethought that you clearly put into bringing in that partner. But let me shift our conversation.
And it doesn't stop now.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't stop now, right? We're 5 months in, and we are still in every strategic conversation being very thoughtful about how quickly we grow and who we look at as partners, just to ensure that we maintain it, not just 5 months in, but 5 years in plus. And I
Totally.
agree, Crossplane is, we couldn't have picked a better partner to help us uphold those.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, kudos to you both. Right. Sounds like a great partnership. I'd love to just shift gears to really that kind of some strategic rocket round questions for you, because
Okay.
you have you have a lot. Anyways, you know this. A lot of individuals that lead these companies, they come from a background where oftentimes they grew up on the tools, they come up on the job, they come up through the sites, and they really
Hmm.
think, understandably, in one of two modes. They think as sometimes as an opportunistic sales driven leader, or they think as
Hmm.
kind of a contractor who's really taken upon themselves the mantle of management.
Hmm.
And right now in the industry, the dynamic of the industry is such that it is a financially complex industry right now. And a lot of people are experiencing a lot of financial strain right now. And so I really think that you are such a timely leader to be able to just offer us some very practical advice on a few key areas. So I'm going to jump in. I'm going to put you in the hot seat.
Okay. Okay.
So here's the first question. So right now, if you were tasked with just clawing back 10% OpEx in your organization, a lot of organizations have to cut more than that right now. But where would you where
Hmm.
would you look? Like where would you look for 10% in your organization on the heels of the fall right now?
AI, automation, know-how,
Mm,
right?
mm,
There are
mm,
so many tools that our paper to digital transformation, it sounds mundane, it sounds like obvious, but it has given us so much efficiencies so that everybody that is in my office can do more and can
mm,
expand their responsibilities, and invoicing can go out in a more timely manner, which enhances collections. The accuracy
mm,
of the bills with results in less adjustments from the adjusters, consultants, brokers. And so I think really leveraging technology to allow every employee more efficiency is critical in that. I also think a focus on procurement and cost
mm.
optimization.
Key.
It's always good to take a step back and evaluate your vendor contracts and your suppliers, making sure that you're leveraging your volume purchases and your relationships, and just having those conversations. Oftentimes there's negotiations to be had, and a good partnership will work with one another to optimize costs in a tough time for one or the other and within the industry. And then discretionary spending. I mean, there are travel and marketing spends and stuff that are incredibly important to the business. But if there's any discretionary spend or an investment that we decided to take a chance on this year that can wait a year, that's another area that I try and look towards. I think the goal really is to protect our people and tighten up everywhere else. And
Yeah.
and those are the kind of three ways I think I wear three areas I would begin.
Yeah. Well said. You get to the office. What's the first KPI that you want to look at? What's the first number that you want to know in the morning?
So I before I even get out of bed, I'm checking weather, daily cash control,
Hmm.
and job setup from the day
Oh.
before. And so the weird mix of metrics.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
But
So
those
I was
are
like,
I
so hold on. Weather, cash,
Mhm.
and job setup. Okay, yeah, you got to unpack that.
Yes, yes. Yeah. So I, as a leader, I think the best word to describe me is curious, right? I'm driven, I'm curious, and I'm going to learn as much about the impacts of this industry as I possibly can. And right now, in hurricane season, that's a huge factor in planning and preparing. And so I'm constantly checking my go-to apps and resources and softwares for potential impacts that are going to impact our customer base, and just making sure I'm staying on top of that with my team. And then we have an email that goes out at the end of every day that talks about the jobs that were set up that day. And I love it because I love to see who's performing. I love to congratulate my business developers when they get some big jobs. I love seeing new customer names. Just yesterday in the job setup form, the school I just sent my son to for kindergarten popped up as a customer. And I
No
had no
way.
idea that we were doing work out there. And so it allowed me to call and make a connection. And it's just wins like that that I want to celebrate and I want to know. Then it doesn't hurt that I can then harass them about what dollars can I put in my forecast for that specific job. And then cash is
Yeah.
just because I have to.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Very interesting. Yeah. No, hey, that unpacks it. You connected the dots really well. Okay, we're going into the fall, and I'm
Yes.
curious, what would you say is one of the most urgent initiatives on your plate right now, and how are you going after that?
We have we're prepared for a storm. We've done a lot in my last 2 years to prepare for a storm from a cash flow perspective, financial partnerships, lines of credit, progressive payment, upfront payment, discussions and agreements with our customers. And so then it's just waiting for the storm. And I feel really confident about that process. What I am focused on right now is making sure that we are gaining market share in our local brick and mortar location cities and not neglecting that during a storm, making sure we have critical resources here to continue to serve those accounts. And while everyone else is away, hopefully gain some market share. I would do great on a national scale, but I want to dominate Austin and Houston and DFW. And so really putting support on the ground in those cities where we have offices is a huge focus of mine. And then the second would be operational AI. I can't say it enough. I think it's going to change our industry. It's going to enhance our customer experience. And it has to start somewhere. And we're starting with management softwares that digitalize all of the documentation in the field. It improves accuracy and timing of invoicing. And then we'll pivot to a customer portal where they have some real time information. And I think there's a bunch of steps to get there. And so that's a big focus of mine. I think it's the future of all industries, frankly.
So a lot of, I mean, a person could say what you're describing is change. There's change coming to the industry, and leading and communicating through change is probably as much a art as it is a science. How do you
Mhm.
what has worked for you to communicate change, to get your team on board with changes that you think are necessary?
It's just how I deal or how I encourage everyone to deal with customers. I find out my employees' pain points. Those are a lot easier to find out. I'm learning those all the time, right? But what areas of your job are complicated or are boring or not fun? And then saying, okay, have I got a solution and an idea for you? And it's making their life easier, making them more efficient, helping them grow and setting them up for success further down the line. I think and just communicating, here's why we need to do it. Here's how it's going to benefit you. Here's how it's going to benefit the company. Here's the long-term benefits. It's been most of our employees have been really open to change, and it might take a little bit of time to get there. The trainings are never fun, but when you actually get into it and utilize it how it's supposed to be utilized, it's just a huge, it can change your role and your day. And all we have to do is be successful at one change for them want to embrace and to believe in me for the next one. But the important piece of information that one of my private equity partners gave me recently that I've really taken to heart is he was like, you need to establish a change budget. And just like any other budget, you don't want to use it all in 1 month. And so really be thoughtful and strategic in what and how you prioritize your changes and make sure that you are taking the temperature of your employees and your partners and their ability to change and put one more thing on their plate and change one more process and adapt. And so it's an art for sure. And I'm sure I'll make quite a few mistakes in my time as president. But I think as long as I'm transparent and humble about it, we'll get there.
Yeah, well said. That sounds like good advice too. Well, there's a couple last things I'd love to get your perspective on before, I
Mhm.
launch us, both into our weekends, and I'm excited. We'll have to like compare kindergarten and, notes and
Yes. Yeah.
ideas for snacks, or I don't know, because my little boy goes to kindergarten here,
Uh-huh.
and my wife and I we're feeling a little nervous, and but I've got my first like parents kindergarten barbecue tomorrow, Kristin. So I'm just, I'm
Okay.
like, I got to think about that. I'm evaluating, like, I don't know about you, but I think a lot about, like, okay, you know, that kid could become my kid's friend, and that's what their parents are like
Mm.
on that little guy, and or
We
like,
do the
oh man, those
opposite. We
parents.
go, ooh,
Oh, we
we
do the opposite.
love. Yeah, that's what I encourage you to do. Do the opposite. Find the parents you like and just force them to be friends
All right,
with those kids.
I'm right. I'm writing that down. I'm writing that down. But let,
Yeah.
let me ask you something. As we were going through this conversation, that was just really, apparent to me, is that for a lot of individuals, the strain that the market is in right now is really forcing a lot of leaders to probably appreciate, like, just the finance, like the financial infrastructure of their business in a way that they just maybe haven't in the past. And there's a lot of financial leaders right now who are trying, in a sense, to kind of bring things to the attention of leadership that really
Mhm.
require some very sobering discussions. You're transitioning from, the senior leader of finance to the senior leader of the, of operational excellence in the organization. What would be your advice to finance leaders in this industry that have to deliver maybe have some difficult conversations this fall with their team and their colleagues? And how would you advise them to be able to have those conversations in a way that accomplish what needs to be accomplished? Things need to move ahead, people need to be honored, the business has to be maintained. But what would be your advice to, just because you're in this interesting role now where
Mhm. Mhm.
you've lived in both roles, and you've come to the industry with an open mind and kind of a fresh perspective, and so you get to look at it
Mhm.
kind of objectively in a way that people that came up in the industry don't. So yeah, so just really concisely, a lot of finance leaders who are looking down the barrel at what they think is potentially going to be a difficult management planning meeting for next year. They recognize they're going to have to really make their points land with individuals who either A, don't always appreciate the financials, or B,
Mhm.
maybe have to deliver some news that might cause people to kind of sit up a little taller. What's your advice to those financial leaders?
I always start with a really simple flash. So here is a sensitivity analysis. If we do this much, here's what it means for the business. If we hit this target, here's what it means for the business. And if we hit this target, here's what it needs. We're on track to hit the low end, which means that earnings are going to be X, covenants are going to fail, whatever, we're going to be out of cash by this date, whatever that means. And in order to really stay afloat, let's identify the bucket that of spending that we need to cut. And once you've identified that bucket, I think it's really important to get your leadership team and your key employees' opinions on that. If you had to cut 10% of your division, what would it be? And people are last. People are last. What is something that you've invested in, or a project that you had on the calendar for Q4, or a vendor that maybe we're overpaying and we need to go back and negotiate? And so it's getting the buy-in of everybody so that it's their idea as well, but they have an understanding of exactly why we have to cut what we have to cut, and the ramifications of not making those cuts. Then it leads to layoffs, or then it leads to covenant failure, or then it leads to money out of the owner's pockets, whatever that might be. But just very clearly illustrating it to them in a simple form and giving them a bucket, and then meeting with them and brainstorming on creative ways to make it happen that protects the employees, but also gives their buy-in. And then it's when we communicate, everybody's a part of it. And yeah, maybe you're losing your project that's been your baby for a while, but hopefully it's just delayed to the next year. And there's a general understanding as to exactly why it has to happen.
Yeah, so you've had this discussion before. Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
have experience in
yeah,
restructuring, and
yeah,
and so certainly, so it's
yeah.
never
Well,
fun, but there's a
no.
lot of ways you can go about it. And I always tell my salespeople the easiest thing to do is to bring in more revenue. So let's not just focus on cost optimization, but how can we bring in revenue? Because none of this is a problem if the revenue is there. And so just as it's a shared responsibility to get out of a tough financial period of time. And we've got to all work together to get there.
Yeah. Great advice. Yeah, great advice. And I a person could almost just break that into a process. That's like the agenda for their slide deck. Yeah, it's good.
Yep.
So here's my last question to you, Kristin. And hey, I got a list of stuff I wanted to go through that we could have had. So we'll have to have you back for part 2. But
I'd love to.
You're pretty savvy. You're pretty savvy. So there's a lot to draw from. Let me ask you this. So when you agreed to be on this discussion and you think about even the types of people that might listen to this, other restorers, maybe members of your team, is there a question or a topic or a subject that you were kind of hoping that we would get to, or I'd get a chance to ask you that I haven't asked yet? And I just love to give that opportunity now.
Oh, that's a really good question. I've got my thoughts I'm going through now. The biggest thing and struggle in our business right now is the conversion of MSAs. It really is. And the development of the sales team, the coaching of the sales team. How long do we give new business developers to produce? What support can I give them at onboarding and throughout their first few years to ensure that they're being coached properly and that they're productive in the field? And so for me, that I spend so much time with our sales team trying to figure out how I can be a better resource for their success. And as I just mentioned, revenue can solve quite a bit of things. And so what I would have you ask the next person so that when I'm listening, I get this answer a little bit different than what you asked. It's what is the best resource and support that I can give my salespeople to improve revenue and customer relationships so that I'm not at a point where I'm struggling financially and worrying about cost optimization.
Yeah.
And I haven't figured it out. I do think that there's an accelerated onboarding and training and mentoring program that I would like to put into place to really help expedite that. But I don't know if that's the magic answer or not. Maybe easier said than done.
Hey, I don't know of a silver bullet. What I know is that humans lead businesses, and humans just they are both, I think, the most exciting and most demanding, the most exciting, the most, I would say, inspiring, but also the most complicating part of business. Special thanks to Kristin for walking us through her playbook on operational excellence. Something she said that keeps coming back to me. Once you nail that first job, repeat business follows naturally. But nailing execution means having clear sight lines on the numbers that matter: cash position, daily job flow, and whether the next truck is even worth sending out. That reframes how we think about business development. Less chasing, more converting what's already in the pipeline through disciplined execution backed by financial clarity. The market is brutal right now, but operators like Kristin show you how to navigate it with systems that hold and a culture that lasts. Thanks for listening to Mission Critical. I'm Leighton Healey. See you in the next episode.